Declan Rowe and the Surgeon ruled Glasgow's underworld with ruthless precision. Masterminds behind Scotland's deadliest gang, the Barras Butchers. When debts turned deadly and bodies began piling up, UK police faced their most dangerous challenge yet: stopping a drug lord who plotted murder to clear his accounts. What happened next would shock the nation and expose a criminal empire built on fear, betrayal, and cold-blooded calculation. In the early 2010s, the East End of Glasgow was a battleground for small-time criminals desperate to climb the underworld ladder. Amid the chaos, a new name began to echo through alleyways, betting shops, and housing estates: the Barras Butchers. What started as a ragtag crew of shoplifters and car thieves evolved into one of Scotland's most feared criminal organizations. Their transformation was swift and brutal, leaving police and rivals stunned by their sudden rise. At the center of the group was a man known only as Declan Rowe. Little is known about Rowe's early life. Born into poverty, he grew up in and around Glasgow's tenements, where gang culture and violence were normal. What set him apart was his cold intelligence. While others chased quick money with reckless abandon, Rowe observed and calculated. He understood that true power came not from chaos, but from control and fear. The gang's name wasn't just for show. The Barras Butchers earned their gruesome reputation by turning murder into a calling card. Rival dealers who crossed them didn't just disappear. They were found in the backs of refrigerated meat trucks, often dismembered and wrapped in butcher paper. These vans, left parked near the famous Barras market, sent a clear and horrifying message: betrayal would be punished with surgical precision. In less than 5 years, the Barras Butchers muscled their way to the top of Glasgow's drug trade. They cut deals with Eastern European traffickers and used the city's industrial shipping yards to funnel cocaine through Rotterdam. Their method was simple: blend in with legitimate businesses, avoid flashy shows of wealth, and keep their operation quiet but deadly. Unlike the flashier gangs of London or Manchester, the Butchers thrived in silence. At street level, the gang enforced order with terrifying efficiency. They used local teams to distribute drugs and collect debts, ensuring no trace led back to the top. Those who failed to pay up were made examples of, beaten, burned, or worse. Community fear kept mouths shut, and any attempt by police to gather intel hit a wall of silence. Even long-standing criminal families refused to cross them. What made the Barras Butchers especially dangerous wasn't just the violence, it was the structure. Rowe operated more like a corporate executive than a street thug. He assigned roles, enforced discipline, and punished disloyalty with terrifying creativity. With a brutal code and an almost military hierarchy, the gang didn't just deal drugs. They ran a criminal enterprise with efficiency rarely seen in UK crime history. By 2016, the Barras Butchers weren't just Glasgow's problem anymore. They were Scotland's nightmare. And the worst was yet to come. By 2016, Glasgow's East End had changed. On the surface, new housing projects and small businesses gave the impression of progress, but underneath, something far darker was growing. Police noticed a disturbing trend: a sharp rise in missing persons cases, violent assaults, and murders, all connected in ways no one could yet prove. The victims came from different backgrounds, ages, and parts of the city. But there was one thread that eventually stood out. They all had past involvement in low-level drug deals, and most had debts. At first, it seemed like random street crime. Gang disputes were nothing new in the city, and many of the victims were people already known to police. But as weeks turned into months, detectives began to sense something more calculated at play. The deaths weren't impulsive or chaotic. They followed a pattern: methodical, brutal, and clean. Bodies were found in industrial skips, riverbanks, and even abandoned freezers, often showing signs of professional restraint or post-mortem mutilation. In nearly every case, phones were wiped, CCTV footage was missing or mysteriously corrupted, and witnesses were nowhere to be found. What raised more alarms was the eerie silence that followed each murder. No gang retaliations, no revenge killings, no arrests, just fear. The streets were quieter, not safer, just more controlled. Dealers who once bragged about their territory now refused to speak to anyone. Some moved cities altogether, others vanished without a trace. The community wasn't just unwilling to talk, they were terrified. Something powerful was watching, and no one wanted to be next. It was a detective analyst named Claire Donnelly who first spotted the deeper pattern. Tasked with reviewing cold cases linked to the drug trade, she began connecting the dots. Each victim had ties to the same Glasgow neighborhood. Each one owed money, but not to the same dealer. It wasn't territorial violence. It was targeted elimination. Debt collectors weren't just collecting, they were erasing debts permanently by erasing the people who owed them. Donnelly flagged her findings to the Serious Organized Crime Division. Within days, a covert task force was assembled. It was clear that something bigger was happening, something far more structured than a turf war. Surveillance operations were launched, wiretaps approved, and plainclothes officers were sent into hotspots. But still, the main players remained ghosts behind it all. Police suspected was an unseen hand. A name began to emerge in whispers, from frightened informants and fading surveillance logs. Declan Rowe. The Barras Butchers weren't just a violent gang. They were executing a strategy. The police didn't yet know why, or what the endgame was. But they were sure of one thing. Glasgow's deadliest gang wasn't killing for revenge. They were killing for a reason. With pressure mounting and bodies piling up, Police Scotland knew that traditional surveillance wouldn't be enough. They needed someone inside the operation. Someone who could get close to the core without being detected. That's when the decision was made to embed an undercover officer deep within the criminal network connected to the Barras Butchers. It was a high-risk move, but one the task force believed could crack open the gang's secretive inner circle. The officer, known only by the alias Danny, had a proven track record. He had previously infiltrated small-time operations across the UK, and his working-class Glaswegian background gave him. Danny was inserted into a loosely connected affiliate gang operating out of Edinburgh, a crew known for handling drug distribution on behalf of larger groups in Glasgow. Within months, Danny earned a reputation as a reliable enforcer. Quiet, efficient, and loyal. It wasn't long before Danny was noticed by a figure who made the entire operation shift gears. She was known only as the Surgeon, Declan Rowe's most trusted lieutenant and the person responsible for enforcing discipline within the gang. A former butcher with a dark past and a sharp mind, she had a reputation for making problems disappear, literally. Her role wasn't just violence, it was control. She managed everything from debt collection to body disposal, and she did it with clinical precision. Danny's introduction to the Surgeon marked a turning point. Through her, he gained access to private meetings and coded conversations that began to reveal the depth of Rowe's criminal enterprise. It wasn't just drugs being moved across the country. There was a system, an economy, built on fear, manipulation, and cold financial logic. Danny discovered that the killings weren't random acts of terror. They were a method of balancing the books. Declan Rowe, despite the gang's success, was drowning in debt to powerful international cartels. His reputation as a calm and collected leader masked the truth. He was under immense pressure to deliver profits or face consequences. And in a desperate move to avoid conflict with his overseas suppliers, Rowe began settling accounts in the most brutal way imaginable. Those who owed him money and couldn't pay were marked for death. A human life, in his mind, was simply an unpaid invoice. As Danny fed information back to the task force, the picture grew clearer. The Barras Butchers weren't just maintaining power, they were executing a financial survival strategy, cutting losses by cutting throats. The police now faced a chilling reality. Unless they acted quickly, more people were going to die. and some of them were already on a list. A breakthrough came unexpectedly during a raid on a low-level dealer's flat in Glasgow's Rutherglen area. Police were targeting minor players in hopes of rattling the larger network, but what they found changed the entire course of the investigation. Hidden inside the lining of a broken sofa was a cracked burner phone. On it was a file simply titled Solutions. At first glance, it appeared to be a list of names and street nicknames, but when analysts cross-referenced the list, the horror became clear. 8 of the 12 people on the list were already dead. Each name matched a recent murder victim, all previously flagged by the task force as having ties to small drug debts or minor thefts from gang-controlled stock. The list wasn't random, it was a hit list, and it had a purpose. For the first time, police had solid evidence of premeditation. These weren't spontaneous killings or the result of street-level feuds. They were ordered, planned, and executed as part of a larger operation. More chilling was the fact that the list was written like a business plan. Next to each name was a debt amount, dates of last payment, and notes like unreliable, risk of talking, or connected to failed delivery. It was clear that Declan Rowe had turned murder into a tool for clearing balances. These weren't executions driven by rage. They were cold, calculated eliminations, designed to stabilize Rowe's financial standing with the international cartels he owed. Further digital forensics uncovered something even darker. A message sent from the same burner phone to an encrypted email address read, "Down to 4. Balance nearly 0, will be clean by month's end." That message confirmed the worst suspicion. Rowe had a timeline. He planned to kill the remaining people on the list in a matter of weeks and then disappear. What made it worse was that some of the remaining targets were no longer involved in criminal activity. One had entered rehab. Another was working full-time at a construction site, but that didn't matter to Rowe. To him, they were liabilities. Names on a ledger, and liabilities needed to be erased. Armed with this knowledge, the task force accelerated their efforts. They began locating the remaining targets, offering them protection where possible, and preparing for what they now called the final phase of Rowe's campaign. Surveillance increased. Resources were redirected. The fear was that if Rowe succeeded in clearing his list, he'd not only settle his cartel debt, he'd earn the freedom to expand his empire with no loose ends. The Barras Butchers weren't just Scotland's deadliest gang anymore. They were executing a calculated plan, and time was running out to stop them. The name at the top of the remaining list was a man who had once been close to Declan Rowe. He went by the street name Spanner and had been one of the original members of the Barras Butchers, before walking away from the gang life 2 years earlier. After a near-fatal overdose and a brief stint in prison, he had turned things around, working as a mechanic by day and volunteering at a youth center by night. But in Rowe's eyes, redemption didn't erase debt Spanzer owed money from a failed drug delivery back in 2014, and although Rowe had let it slide at the time, the mounting pressure from cartel creditors had changed the rules. Old debts were now being revisited, with deadly consequences. When police identified him as the next likely target, they moved quickly. They approached him, explained the threat, and offered protection. At first he refused, still haunted by the idea of being seen as a grass. But after a second anonymous threat appeared on his car windscreen, he agreed to cooperate. To outwit Rowe and gain leverage, the police staged Spanner's death, using forensic actors, fake blood, and a burned-out car registered in his name. They constructed a convincing crime scene in an abandoned industrial estate. Within hours, news of the killing spread across Glasgow's underworld. The police hoped the hoax would throw the Butchers off balance. Instead, it backfired. Rather than slowing down, Rowe escalated his operation. Surveillance picked up urgent meetings, encrypted messages, and a sudden influx of cash being moved into temporary holding accounts. It was clear Rowe now suspected police interference. What investigators didn't anticipate was just how far he'd go to tie up loose ends. Intercepted messages from within the gang revealed Rowe's next move. He planned what he called a final sweep, a coordinated killing of the last 3 people on the list in one night, followed by a total disappearance. He had arranged new IDs, safe houses in Ireland, and a private jet through shell companies registered abroad. The fake death hadn't slowed him. It had merely pushed him to act faster. Police now faced a critical countdown. The stakes were higher than ever. If Rowe succeeded, 3 more people would die, and the mastermind behind a series of calculated murders would vanish with clean hands and a clear balance. The operation had entered a dangerous new phase, and law enforcement knew they had just days, maybe hours, to stop Scotland's most methodical killer. The moment the task force intercepted Rowe's plan for the final sweep, the tone of the investigation changed from methodical to urgent. Everything indicated he intended to carry out all 3 remaining murders in one coordinated night, using different hit teams for each target. He had devised the plan with military precision, staggering the hits across different areas of Glasgow to make police response difficult and buy himself enough time to flee the country. The team mobilized under the newly designated operation name Red Ice, a reference to the method Rowe had used to freeze and store some of his earlier victims. Intelligence revealed that Rowe would use a remote warehouse in the outskirts of Stirling as a central base before the killings began. From there, vehicles, weapons, burner phones, and false documents were to be distributed to the hit teams. But locating this warehouse was only part of the battle. They also had to track and protect the 3 remaining targets, none of whom trusted the police. One of the targets had already vanished by the time officers arrived at his known address, and a frantic search ensued to find him before Rowe's people did. Another, a woman in her late 20s with a history of gang affiliations, was located in a hostel in Dundee. She was reluctant to accept police protection, convinced it was a trap. It took hours of negotiation and a signed court order to get her into safe custody. Meanwhile, Danny, the undercover officer, fed real-time information from within the organization. He learned that Rowe had not only planned the hits, but had also booby-trapped the warehouse with explosives. If police got too close, Rowe intended to destroy all evidence and possibly kill himself in the process. The psychological pressure was mounting. Rowe had entered a state of controlled desperation. His only focus was completing the list and vanishing. As midnight approached, surveillance teams followed a van leaving the warehouse, headed toward Loch Lomond. What at first seemed like a transport run was actually the extraction phase of the plan. Rowe and his closest associates were moving to a lochside property, likely to prepare for their departure. The police now had a window, narrow and dangerous, to strike armed units and tactical response teams closed in. Every move had to be timed perfectly. If they waited too long, Rowe would be gone. If they acted too soon, they could trigger the explosives. The balance was razor thin. Everything depended on what happened next. The fate of the remaining targets and the opportunity to bring down Scotland's most ruthless gang hung in the balance. At 2:43 a.m., under cover of darkness, Operation Red Ice moved into its final phase. A convoy of unmarked police vehicles, including armed response units and bomb disposal specialists, surrounded the lochside property where Declan Rowe and his inner circle were hiding. The remote location worked against the gang this time. There was only one road in and out, and it had already been blocked by tactical teams. Surveillance drones hovered silently above the dense pine trees, feeding live footage to a command van parked a mile away. The property, a large converted hunting lodge, appeared quiet. No lights, no movement. But thermal imaging showed 5 heat signatures inside. Police couldn't risk a direct breach without confirming the presence of the hostages. Every second counted, yet one wrong move could detonate the traps Rowe had set. He was paranoid and meticulous. If he suspected law enforcement was closing in, he wouldn't hesitate to destroy everything. including himself. A specialist unit approached on foot, using the forest for cover. Through a side window they caught sight of two people bound to chairs in a soundproofed room. One was unconscious. The other, though gagged, was alive and alert. This was the confirmation they needed. Officers moved in with precision, disabling the front door's locking system using a signal jammer and breaching charge. Within seconds, the team stormed the building. Inside, chaos erupted. The surgeon, Rowe's second in command, fled through a hidden trapdoor beneath the kitchen floor, disappearing into a tunnel that led to the edge of the lock. Meanwhile, Rowe was found in the study, desperately trying to burn ledgers filled with handwritten notes, payment records, and cartel correspondence. He didn't resist arrest, but his silence was chilling. He simply stared at the officers as they cuffed him, as if already thinking 2 steps ahead. The 2 hostages were rescued, though one required immediate medical attention due to sedative injections. In another room, officers found makeshift explosives wired to a dead man's switch, likely a last resort had Rowe felt cornered. The bomb disposal unit disarmed the setup just minutes before it was due to arm itself automatically. The success of the raid dealt a heavy blow to the Barras Butchers, but not a final one. The surgeon had escaped, and with her, a hard drive containing offshore bank details and encrypted contacts across Europe. Forensics later confirmed that some of the equipment found in the lodge matched materials used in previous killings. The operation had saved lives and captured the gang's leader, but police knew this was only a partial victory. One of the deadliest gang networks Scotland had ever seen had been wounded, but not destroyed, and one of its most dangerous minds was still out there. In the days following the raid, the media hailed Operation Red Ice as a landmark success. Declan Rowe was behind bars. The surviving victims were safe, and police had secured a cache of physical evidence tying the Barras Butchers to over a dozen murders. But within the task force, there was no celebration. The escape of the surgeon had turned a critical victory into a looming threat. Her absence wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a warning. Initial interrogation of Rowe yielded nothing. He refused to speak, not even when presented with the damning ledgers recovered from the lodge. But pressure mounted when one of his inner circle lieutenants, a man known on the streets as Minto, agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity. Minto's confession painted a chilling picture. He revealed that the surgeon had been preparing for the gang's collapse long before the raid. She had siphoned off more than £2 million sterling, 0 pence, in cryptocurrency through ghost accounts, and had personally arranged hits on 2 detectives involved in the investigation. Her exit wasn't a panic escape, it was the next phase of her plan. The threat extended beyond gangland revenge. Intelligence officers intercepted chatter on encrypted messaging platforms, suggesting that the surgeon was attempting to rebuild the Barras Butchers abroad. The Balkan region was mentioned repeatedly, particularly parts of Croatia and Montenegro known for harboring organized crime groups. A red notice was issued through Interpol, and security was increased for all officers involved in the case. Meanwhile, the scope of Rowe's financial dealings began to unfold. Hidden among the lodge documents were references to offshore entities, complex laundering chains, and transactions connected to criminal syndicates in Spain, Colombia, and even Dubai. Rowe had built a network that spanned continents, and the surgeon now controlled a critical piece of it. She wasn't just his enforcer, she had become his successor. Then came the most chilling development. 2 weeks before Rowe's trial, 2 key witnesses vanished. One was a former dealer who had turned informant. The other was a forensic accountant scheduled to testify about the gang's money trail. Both disappeared within days of each other, with no signs of struggle and no contact since police believed the surgeon had ordered the hits from abroad using hired operatives. If so, it meant she had re-established lines of command and still had loyal soldiers in Scotland. The investigation had gone global. Rowe's arrest hadn't ended the reign of the Barras Butchers. It had forced them to adapt. Now fragmented and more dangerous, the network operated like a virus. harder to trace, harder to destroy. And with the surgeon at large, the threat of resurgence loomed larger than ever. Despite every effort by law enforcement, the surgeon remained a step ahead. Her trail stretched from Croatia to northern Italy, then vanished somewhere along the Adriatic coast. Surveillance footage showed her boarding a private yacht in Split, accompanied by two unknown men believed to be Eastern European fixers. Authorities intercepted financial transfers linked to encrypted wallets, but every lead ended in dead ends. She was gone, off the grid, and likely under a new identity, funded by millions laundered from the Butchers' empire. Interpol maintained the red notice, but as weeks turned into months, confidence in capturing her faded. She had the money, the connections, and now the experience to survive in the shadows. Back in Scotland, her absence didn't mean silence. Rumors spread quickly through Glasgow's underworld. Whispers of coded messages, new players emerging in old territories, and quiet visits from men with Eastern European accents, asking the right people the wrong questions. Then came the news that confirmed everyone's worst fear. Two witnesses from Rowe's upcoming trial, one a protected informant, the other a former courier for the Butchers, were found dead within a span of 4 days. Both deaths were made to look like accidents. One, a car crash, the other, an apparent overdose. But internal police investigations found clear signs of tampering. Phone records were deleted, surveillance cameras had blind spots, and both victims had received cryptic messages just days before their deaths. The murders sent shockwaves through the task force. Extra precautions were taken to secure the remaining witnesses. Some were relocated, others removed from the witness list entirely to preserve their safety. Still, a growing sense of powerlessness spread among officers. The message was clear: even with Rowe locked away, the Barras Butchers could still strike, and no one, not even those protected by the state, was truly safe. Well, while Declan Rowe remained unshaken, his trial was set to be one of the most high-profile criminal cases in modern Scottish history. Security at the courthouse was unprecedented. Snipers were positioned on rooftops, sniffer dogs swept the building daily, and all attendees were thoroughly screened. Rowe was escorted in armored vans, wearing a bulletproof vest beneath his prison uniform. Still, he showed no emotion, no sign of fear or regret. He was calm, almost detached, as if he already knew the outcome didn't matter. And in a way, it didn't, because even as the courtroom prepared to sentence one man, another was still free, trained, funded, and determined to rebuild. The Barras Butchers had lost their leader, but their legacy wasn't over. It had simply evolved. The trial of Declan Rowe was set to be the climax of years of investigation, a chance for justice to finally catch up with one of Scotland's most notorious criminals. Courtrooms were packed with journalists, victims' families, and law enforcement officials, all eager to hear the details behind the Barras Butchers' reign of terror. The prosecution presented an overwhelming case: testimonies from former gang members, forensic evidence linking Rowe to multiple murders, and financial records detailing the vast drug empire he controlled. For the first time, the public saw the full scope of the operation and the cold calculation behind each killing. Yet, as the trial progressed, a new layer of complexity emerged. The defense painted Rowe not as a ruthless killer, but as a man under unimaginable pressure from international cartels. According to their argument, Rowe was caught in a dangerous game where survival depended on ruthless decisions. While this didn't excuse his actions, it offered a glimpse into the forces driving organized crime, a brutal world where debts were paid in blood. Despite the defense's attempts, the evidence was irrefutable. After weeks of testimony and detailed cross-examinations, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts, including multiple murders, drug trafficking, and conspiracy to commit murder. The judge sentenced Rowe to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 35 years, a sentence reflecting the severity and scale of his crimes. But as Rowe was led away, the atmosphere in the courtroom was heavy with uncertainty. Outside, police briefed the press on ongoing efforts to track down the surgeon. They warned that while Rowe was behind bars, the gang's network remained active, driven by those still loyal to her. Scotland's deadliest gang was wounded, but not defeated. In the months that followed, law enforcement made several international arrests linked to the Butchers' money laundering schemes, and some of the surgeon's known associates were detained in Europe. Still, she remained at large, a ghost in the criminal underworld, continuing to orchestrate moves from the shadows. For the communities affected by the Barras Butchers, the trial brought a measure of closure, but no real peace. The scars left by years of violence and fear ran deep. Families mourned, and the memory of those lost lingered. The story of the Barras Butchers was a stark reminder of the complexities of organized crime. The way it weaves into communities, corrupts individuals, and challenges the very system designed to stop it. Police Scotland's fight against the gang showed courage and persistence, but also the limits of the law when faced with shadowy figures willing to kill to survive. As the sun set on the trial, one thing was clear. The battle against the Barras Butchers was far from over. The gang had been dealt a heavy blow, but in the shadows, the surgeon waited. Patient, calculated, and ready to reclaim what was lost.